You're watching live from Paris here on France 24, time for business with Kate Moody. Hi, Kate. We're going to start off with the French government's pretty big €100 billion stimulus package post-coronavirus, and obviously creating and protecting jobs is the focus of that.
Absolutely. It's been the number one priority for Emmanuel Macron since the beginning of this crisis, really, because despite the huge state-sponsored furlough program that prevented wide-scale layoffs during the lockdown, 500,000 people did lose their jobs in the first half of this year. And economists have warned that if government support is scaled back, there could be a huge uptick in job cuts and bankruptcies. Now, to that end, Prime Minister Jean Castex is funneling over €7.5 billion to extend that paid leave scheme for businesses that need it. Economy Minister Bruno Le Maire clarifying this evening that the scheme would be extended into next year if it's needed. Almost €7 billion, meanwhile, will go to help getting young people into the workforce.
Notre priorité absolue, c'est l'emploi. Avec ce plan, nous soutenons dès aujourd'hui l'emploi de ces premières victimes de la crise, les jeunes et les demandeurs d'emploi. Nous investissons donc massivement dans la formation pour les métiers et les filières de demain, la transition écologique, l'industrie innovante, le numérique par exemple.
Unprecedented spending to deal with an unprecedented crisis. But where is all this money coming from, and how will it be paid back? Fraser Jackson has some of the answers.
An historic plan in its scope and ambition, the words of the French Prime Minister as he announced the government's scheme to pull France out of its post-COVID slump. An unprecedented €100 billion in aid to stimulate the economy. But who is going to pay for what is being dubbed the biggest recovery package by any European nation so far? The European Union itself will be footing the bill for a sizable chunk, with 40% coming from the trading bloc stimulus package. The French government will be raising the rest on financial markets. In effect, they'll be adding €60 billion to the national debt, bringing it to around 120% of GDP. In an interview with France 2, Finance Minister Bruno Le Maire defended the government's thinking.
Aujourd'hui, il faut protéger les salariés, protéger les entreprises, c'est le temps de la dépense publique. On dépense de l'argent pour relancer l'activité économique. Mais demain, effectivement, il faudra relancer non seulement l'économie, mais rembourser cette dette. On le fera comment? Par la croissance, par la bonne tenue de nos finances publiques et par la poursuite de réformes structurelles.
The government is hoping that stimulating the supply side of the economy will in turn boost economic activity generally. There's also the possible implementation of tougher tax laws on multinational tech giants such as Google, Apple, Facebook and Amazon. One thing the government has ruled out, the increase of tax on individuals and households. In short, the French government is spending big to overcome the crisis in the short term and worrying about footing the bill later on.
Let's check in on the day's trading action now. Wall Street has sharply reversed course after a rally that had brought stocks to new record highs earlier this week. We saw a pretty big sell-off there. The Dow Jones plunging 800 points at the closing bell. The tech sector was especially hard hit, snapping a 10-day winning streak. As you can see, the Nasdaq closing down nearly 5% there. Apple shares were down around 7%. Facebook, Amazon, and Google around 5% each. One market analyst saying that market euphoria had reached a tentative peak on signs that America's labor market recovery is stalling. Others saying it's merely a correction after far too many gains. We saw losses for the major European indices as well, as manufacturing and economic activity across the Eurozone showed signs of slowing down in August. The CAC 40 faring a bit better than the DAX and FTSE 100, down just under half a percentage point. Well, the number of Americans seeking unemployment benefits fell to its lowest level since the start of the coronavirus pandemic last week. 881,000 people filed claims. That's down from a peak of nearly 7 million in a single week back in March. The number of continuing claims fell as well to around 13 million. It still remains starkly higher than the worst week of the financial crisis a decade ago. An economist said that the Labor Department had changed the way it counts claims, which could have artificially deflated last week's figures. While there are other worrying signs for the U.S. labor market as well, data on Wednesday showed that the private sector had added only 428,000 jobs in August. That's half of what had been expected. Airlines also among the employers who've warned that they could cut tens of thousands of jobs in the coming weeks. Meanwhile, the U.S. trade deficit has risen to its highest level in over a decade, $63.6 billion, as the U.S. imported nearly 19% more than it exported during the month of July. Well, meanwhile, in the UK, Amazon plans to create a further 7,000 permanent jobs by the end of this year. That'll bring its total for 2020 to 10,000. The e-commerce giant is also taking on 20,000 additional staff in temporary jobs during the holiday season. Most of the positions will be in warehouses and sorting and delivery stations. While traditional retailers have struggled during the pandemic, Amazon has seen a huge jump in demand. Online orders now account for 28% of overall spending in the UK. Of course, always a little bit of controversy, especially during the pandemic, Chris, about Amazon and the way that it treats its staff, especially during this health crisis.
Kate Moody, thanks very much. That was your Business Bulletin.